Hello there and welcome back to another video. If you do not know who I am, my name is Paloma, my artist name is Paloma the Peach, and I show my art stuff on the internet. Now for today, I am going to be showing you guys my process with Womp 3D. Womp 3D is a super beginner friendly 3D art app that helps you make really cool 3D stuff, and this is sponsored by Womp as well, so a huge thank you to them. But I have personally experimented and used Womp for a long time, and I think I have a good grasp of it now, and I'm ready to show you guys how I can turn a 2D sketch or 2D artwork into a 3D piece. Also, Womp is completely free to use, though they do offer their pro version for a monthly fee, which I personally have, though it's not necessary at all. If you just want to dabble, it is completely free, and I think it is still a really great, fully fledged app in and of itself. Now, as a quick disclaimer, I am not by any means an expert 3D artist, nor an expert in Womp 3D, so I highly recommend also checking other tutorials if this is your first one. And also, I will only be touching on the tools that I personally use in Womp. There's lots of others that I don't use, so yes, that is a quick disclaimer. Before we get into my actual artwork on Womp, I wanted to discuss a few of the tools and a little bit of Womp's interface, because I don't use everything, and I also just I want to explain everything that I do use to you guys so that you guys can have a good understanding of Womp, because we all know that jumping into new software, no matter how beginner friendly it is, it's always a task. So here we have a new project. This is just a sample that Womp always puts on new projects, on new files. But yeah, so as far as controls goes, I am using the left click to spin the view around, and then I can do a right click and just sort of shift it instead of spinning it around. And then I am scrolling up to zoom out and down to zoom in. So that's sort of basic controls. Honestly, I don't mess with much more than that. As far as our little setup right now, so on the left-hand side, we have that white bar. And this is you guys can see it says lights, cameras, and then objects. I don't mess with the cameras at all, so sorry, I don't know much about that. I don't mess with them. Lights, I will usually mess with at the end, and you guys will see in my project I do add one in. And then objects, this is basically our layers in a way. And essentially the way that Womp works is that you choose objects to morph into your artwork, if that makes sense. So here we can see that we have cubes, cylinders, sphere, cone, pyramid, and torus. And then if you see this little crown on anything, it's because I use the pro version of Womp. Womp is free, like I said, because I'm an artist and I like Womp, so I pay the pro version. If you see that little crown, that means it's only available in pro. But yeah, we have all these shapes and such. And then there's community files and stuff. I don't really mess with it very often, but yeah, this is just sort of pre-made stuff by Womp, and then also community files is stuff that people upload. But yes, so we have our shapes here that make up this little sample project. And so we have this sphere here. Also, the way that things move in 3D art, because they are three-dimensional, they're going to move on 3 different planes. So when I hover over this, you can see that there's a purple arrow, a red arrow, and a green arrow. And this is essentially your Y, Z, and X axes. You don't really have to understand what that means because I barely do anyway, but once you start messing with Womp, you'll start to understand how exactly messing with each arrow will cause different movements. So for example, the purple one, Y-axis, it just moves up and down, higher or lower. Depending on the view, it'll also change. But the Y-axis right now on the view that I'm looking at, it's moving it side to side. and then the Z is moving it forwards and backwards, but if I spin it this way, that'll switch. That is what these arrows are. I don't use these guys very often. And then we have them also on the sides of our shape. These little like planes come up. This is a sphere, so it'll always increase proportionally. So let me get a cylinder in here. So let's say I have this cylinder. So if I want to make it taller but not necessarily bigger, I can just grab that purple one and pull it up. And it'll be purple because we know that the purple arrow moves it up and down. This purple one will make it taller or shorter, and then this green one will make it skinnier without making it shorter. And then this red one will make it skinnier, and so on. So that's what those little arrows on the edges of our shape do. And then finally, we have these three that are like off to the corner of our shape, and this is for rotation. We have the Z, we have the Y, and we have the X. This is just to like help you fine tune and get the rotation. Again, you don't have to know what the letters mean, but just mess around with it and you'll get the hang of how it works rotationally. Like this Y, it just kind of spins the object around without necessarily moving its position. Let's talk about the object area over to the left. So like I said, this is kind of like layers. If you work digitally, you know that in digital programs, we have our layers menu, and you can kind of think of it like that. I don't want this cylinder to show anymore, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna select it by clicking on it, and then I'm gonna press this little I, and you won't be able to see it anymore. It won't be in your way. And again, to see it again, you just press it, and that's pretty universal to all digital programs. The I will simply mean visible or invisible. Let's mess with this sphere again. So I want to put it next to this cube, but I don't want it to melt into the cube like that. And that's where we go over to our right side, the little white bar on the right. So the only thing that I sort of mess with on here is object and scene. You'll see those two at the top of the white bar. I only mess with those. I do not touch the camera, like I said. So for object, we have this form area, and right now our form is positive. What that means is that it is adding to our 3D form. You can think of it like that. Positive addition, it's adding to our 3D form. Negative means it would be taking away from our 3D form. So if we go down here, you see that the second sphere in our objects is in like a red color. And you can kind of see that it has a minus, right? It has a minus next to it. That means that it's negative, and it's taking away from our shape. Now, if I were to make it positive, it would be adding to it, right? You can see the sphere. If I make it negative, you don't see the sphere anymore, but you see the shape that it cuts out of our form. So that's what negative is, and it's very helpful. That's kind of how you start achieving little nuances in your work. What is stain? Stain is basically how you get a color or a pattern onto a form. Let me clarify that. So our cube is this nice blue color, right? We click on material. We click on it, we see it's this nice blue color. Well, I'll get into like this material adjustment stuff later on. But cube is this nice blue color. I want my sphere to give my cube a nice ombre effect. So I'm gonna make it pink. And now we don't see the sphere if it's away from our cube, but when it's closer to it, we can see its color, and it just adds that color on there. So instead of adding like a whole shape to our form, we're just adding color. Intersect, I've never used it. I don't use it, so sorry about that. Goop is essentially Womp's like special power, and goop is basically like blending with a paintbrush. So when you're painting and you're blending away with your brush or whatever, that's sort of what goop is like, but for Womp. So as you can see, I'm sliding it all the way down, and the shapes have maintained their their form, their integral form is completely maintained. There is no blending or meshing of them together at all. But if I turn the goop up, they slowly start blending together. And then obviously if I turn it all the way up, you kind of don't even have a sphere and a cube anymore. It's just like this blob. So that's what goop is for. Goop is for blending forms together, and it's very handy, and it makes making 3D artwork very quick and very easy. Now let's go back into our material menu, like I said we would. So I'm still looking at this pink sphere. I'm gonna click on the orb of saved material. That's just what it's called for right now. My color is pink. It's not showing up right here, but my color is pink. And then we have all of these different effects that you can add to your material. I just recommend messing around with them. You can always undo it. So roughness, for example, it's gonna make my sphere super flat and matte. But if I turn that roughness back down and turn up the glass, it's gonna create something very shiny and slightly translucent. If I turn up the metalness, it's gonna give it like that extremely reflective chrome-like appearance. It's super cool. So yeah, I recommend messing around with all of the characteristics that are given to you for materials, because that's how you're gonna learn about it better. I don't use all of them personally, but it can just help you achieve like some really cool textures. And then again, to change the color, you just click on that little colored sphere and then you just change it around. Now let's say I really love what I've created here and I want to move it around or make it bigger. Because I have all of these in one area, you can kind of think of an area as a folder. I can select that area and move them any way that I want. Now I'm going to take this area and make it bigger. Let's say I want to make it bigger for some reason, so I'm making it bigger. There she is. She's bigger. I moved her position. So that's how you can move forms all together. Now, something to note about the form of your shapes and also goop. So as you can see, I have my red sphere down here selected. I'm going to change the color so we don't get confused. I'm going to make it green. So I have my green sphere, right? As you can see, if I go to my object menu on the right hand side, I can't change it to negative or stain, and I also can't edit the goop. And that's because this sphere is above all my other objects in terms of order in my object menu. So if I wanted this sphere to be negative, let's say I want to make it negative, I want it to take a chunk out of my cube, and I want to turn the goop up, I just have to move it down underneath my cube, and suddenly this is available. So I can make it negative like I wanted, right? And I can do some nice goop on it. But again, if I were to move it up above everything, I would not be able to do it anymore. It'll get locked as negative, but it won't affect my shape. So yeah, make sure that if you want something to be negative or to have goop with a certain shape, to put it under your other shape. And then of course, so I'm gonna add another sphere here. Let's say I wanted another sphere as part of my form, but let's say it doesn't have to, I'm not going to edit it in any sort of way along with the other shapes and I want to keep organized, I can just move it and it'll create another area. This will be like my other folder. Now, again, because we're in a different area, as you can see on the right hand side, I cannot make it negative, I cannot make it a stain, and I can't edit the goop. Again, there's no other shapes in that area with it, so it can't have that effect on any other shapes. If I were to move my cube into this area and put it above my sphere, then I could add in some factors, right? So let's talk, I'm gonna make everything invisible except for my cube. Let's talk about over here on the right hand side where we see mirror. This is basically what it says. It is a mirror of the object that you've selected, and all you do is turn it on or turn it off. So I have the x-axis right now, and I like to keep show plane on so that I can see the little green screen between them and I can know where exactly that mirror sits. Yeah, essentially you can mirror your shape in any way that you want. This is the y-axis, and then this is the z-axis, right? Basically, that's all it is. I do use it at times whenever I want to keep things really symmetrical. And so yeah, that's what the mirror tool is. It's very handy, just like in digital work, you know, most digital software will have a mirror option. It just helps you work faster, or at least visualize how you want things to look. Now let's talk very quickly about scene. So we're gonna go to the right hand side, all the way at the top where we see object, camera, scene. We're gonna go to scene, and this is where you can change the color of your background. Yeah, you can make it any color that you want. And you can also turn off the grid. If the grid bothers you or it's not helpful for you, you can turn it off, and it has this nice little studio-esque background. And then you can change the light that is on your form because it is a 3D object technically. So you just click on it, and they have all of these different options for lighting, and it can really drastically change your objects. So I recommend playing around with these, seeing which ones you really like, because it really does change the vibe of your artwork. And then again, you can also change where the light source is coming from, as you can see. And you can also change how bright it is. Now, as far as adding lights on the left hand side, so let's go back to our little objects, and then above it we see camera. Don't mess with that. And then above that we see lights. I'm going to put add light, and I'm going to do a spherical light. I want my light to be super bright. I want it to cast these shadows, and you can make it any color that you want, absolutely any color. I can change my environmental light, and that way you can see the spherical light that I added much easier. That's what those little lights that you can add are for. It helps create the mood, it helps create the scene, and you don't have to use them. I just think they're fun. Okay, so this is essentially a very basic breakdown of the tools that I personally use on Womp. If you want to know more, or you're wanting to learn about tools that I did not touch on, you can check out Womp's website. They have a bunch of tutorials. That's personally what I used to learn Womp many years ago when Womp first came out. Let's get into me making my little artwork. Okay, so let's get into my artwork that I made. So as you guys saw, I am making my little love bug characters 3D. I thought it would be a really cute way to use like the mirror tool as well, which is what I'm doing right now. I have the X mirror turned on, and I just had this so that I could make sure that the bugs are pretty symmetrical because I wanted their bodies to be basically identical. It saves time and work for me. And whenever you're choosing your shapes, you want to play around with all the different shapes that Womp has to offer, but you want to think about if you simplified whatever you drew down to like the most basic shape, that's usually what you want to go for. So for example, the torso, it was most similar to the cylinder, and because the cylinder you can adjust the roundness as well, I made both the cylinders pretty round and got them to the size that I wanted my torsos. And for the heads, I actually ended up going with curves. So I didn't decide on a sphere because I'm not a big fan of like perfectly round shapes. So I don't use spheres very often. I did use them for the hands and the feet, but I gooped them with the arms and the legs to kind of blend them together. But for the heads, I did use a curve. You'll see the curve on the object menu whenever you're selecting on Womp. And as you start getting to know Womp and playing around with it more, you'll start to learn that curves are the most versatile shape that Womp has to offer. The way that like curves work is you add different points to them, so you can make them as long and as curly as you want. You'll see whenever I make the bow for the bug on the left how just like I said, how versatile curves are here on Womp. And so yeah, I decided on curves for the head, like I said, because I didn't want like a perfectly spherical shape, and I knew that I could get the curve to be pretty round, but not like perfectly round. And here I am just putting in the eye sockets and the eyeballs of my bugs. Now, obviously, bugs don't have eye sockets or eyeballs, technically. I mean, they have eyes, but like they're not the same as like our eyeballs. But I really like to add in this element to faces and eyes. I feel like it adds a lot of depth. I think it adds a lot of character. So I do like to create a little bit of an eye socket with a negative sphere and then just add on a sphere on top of it. And the way that I'm making the clothes is I am selecting the cylinder shape, and I basically duplicated it and I made one negative. And what you can do is you can make the positive one, like the one that's going to be the shirt or the clothing, a little bit bigger than the negative, so then it creates like a really cute little shell. You guys will see that develop a little bit later as well. But I like to start coloring my shapes with materials as well, just so that I can just start seeing how it's coming together. And something that I will say about mirroring is that you need to watch out when you start choosing materials for them, because if you are going to stick with a fully mirrored form, regardless of what side your form is on, like the material is going to be the same color on both sides, so you can't make it different colors. So for the bugs, all I did was I just duplicated the form. Like I taught you guys the whole area of like the torso, the arms, the hands, the legs, and the feet. I just duplicated that. And I think even the head, I duplicated that over to the other side so that I didn't have to have the mirror turned on anymore, and I could differentiate the two materials from each other. Yeah, I mean, I am really happy with how this turned out. It was actually pretty simple. Something that I struggled with was I was struggling with like a low resolution on the eyes. For some reason, it just was not looking the way that I wanted. It was looking pixelated, it was looking low res. And I forgot to mention this in the tutorial, but the way that you can actually fix that is you can go to the left menu, go all the way to the top where it says list 3D imports and health. And under health is actually where you can adjust your resolution. Now, because Womp runs on browsers, that means that it runs on the internet, and sometimes if you make your artwork like super high resolution, it can just make the connection a little bit spotty. But I actually ended up just separating the eyes altogether into a different area from the head, because I figured out that sometimes stuff will start to look a little bit pixelated or a little bit low res if there's like a lot going on in one area or folder. So I just separated the eyes and the eye sockets and everything from the head area, and that actually completely fixed my resolution on my little guy. As you guys will see at the end of the video, how much better and crisper the eyes look. But yeah, I mean, I had a lot of fun making this. Womp is like really fun to work in, and I am just gonna let you guys watch the rest of the art making process, and I will check in at the end. So something that you're able to do whenever you finish up your project is Womp actually offers a 3D printing service, which is super cool. And the way that you want to do that is you want to open up a lab file and then import your little guys from the My Projects section on the Objects menu. Then you'll have the option to launch the 3D print assistant, and this essentially helps you resize your project and also like hollow it out so that it can be more affordable. I have another project that I actually did end up 3D printing with this, which is this fish guy, and I made this smaller little print for $8.24, and then I made a larger one which I then painted for about $20, which I think is like a super affordable option for 3D printing. And the great thing is that they are high quality, smooth resin prints, so they're ready to be painted on. And that is it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope it was at least a little bit helpful. If you have any questions, you can leave them down below and I will do my best to answer them. If you like my stuff, you can follow me on Instagram where you can see my artwork. I also have a Patreon page where I send out monthly stickers, prints, and sticker sheets. Again, I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you guys in the next one.